of ASEAN's aspirations. ASEAN's motto is one vision, one identity, one community, emphasizing unity in our diversity. Did you know the ASEAN community was originally envisioned to be established this year, 2020, but ASEAN was ready and formally launched it in 2015. In the declaration on the establishment of the ASEAN community issued at the 27th ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur on the 22nd of November 2015, the realization of the ASEAN community has set a milestone in the integration process and will ensure lasting peace, security, and resilience in an outward-looking region with economies that are vibrant, competitive, and highly integrated, and an inclusive community that is embedded with a strong sense of togetherness and common identity. There are many elements to this statement mentioning peace and security, economy, and a sense of community. Let's take a closer look at the structure of ASEAN. We can think of the ASEAN community as a house with three pillars, namely the political security community, economic community, and socio-cultural community. For the Philippines, the three pillars are coordinated by the Department of Foreign Affairs for Political Security, the Department of Trade and Industry for Economic, and the Department of Social Welfare and Development for the socio-cultural community. Let's know more about the community of ASEAN and how it will benefit us as Filipinos. When ASEAN was formed back in 1967, it aspired for peace in an otherwise unstable environment. ASEAN was established to promote regional peace, collaboration, and mutual assistance on matters of common interest. As a political security community, ASEAN's member states have a common shared stake in being internally resilient and promoting a rules-based, outward-looking region that enjoys lasting peace, security, and stability. It follows the principles of the ASEAN Charter, uses consultation and consensus building, and adheres to the use of peaceful means in resolving disputes. To build a rules-based, people-oriented, people-centered community, the political security community has consistently promoted cooperation in political development that adheres to the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and good governance, as well as respect for, promotion, and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. As interdependence deepened in the region, and with ASEAN's centrality in mind, ASEAN engaged like-minded countries through the ASEAN Regional Forum. The forum's objectives include engagement in constructive dialogue and consultation on political and security issues, and efforts towards confidence building and preventive diplomacy in the Asia-Pacific. 27 countries, including Australia, Canada, China, Timor-Leste, India, Japan, Papua New Guinea, the Republic of Korea, Russia, and the United States are members of the ARF. Another important milestone under political security pillar is the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, a peace treaty established by the founding countries of ASEAN and signed into force on February 24, 1976. Today, 38 countries are signatories to the TAC, which espouses specific settlement of regional disputes and for regional cooperation to achieve peace, amity, and friendship among the peoples of Southeast Asia, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. The political security pillar also addresses commonly shared non-traditional security challenges, including drug trafficking, trafficking in persons, terrorism, disasters, among others. The ASEAN Economic Community aspires to improve the lives of ASEAN citizens by moving towards a freer movement of goods, services, capital, and skilled labor. It aims to be a single market and production base, a highly competitive economic region pursuing equitable economic development, and one fully integrated into the global community. These will boost both ASEAN's intra-regional economy as well as its attractiveness to external economic partners, as an investment destination and a consumer base of 640 million people. ASEAN is one of the world's economic success stories. Partnership, or RCEP, is a step in this direction with negotiated topics such as trade in goods and services, investments, technical cooperation, intellectual property, e-commerce, and the small and medium enterprises. It will bring together 3 billion people, or 45% of the world's population, as well as generate a combined GDP of nearly $21.3 trillion, accounting for nearly 40% of world trade. ASEAN hopes to sign the RCEP within the year. The economic community is also significant to the world's recovery from COVID-19. ASEAN is working on policy measures to mitigate the economic impacts of the outbreak, particularly on micro, small, and medium enterprises, business startups, and the more vulnerable sectors in the region. ASEAN also recognizes the important role of the private sector in the post-pandemic recovery efforts, restarting the economy, rehiring, and restoring business and consumer confidence, as well as studying a proposal for the creation of a high-level special committee that will address the aftermath of the pandemic alongside other ASEAN mechanisms. Is now the chief concern of the ASEAN economic community. ASEAN community building must make a difference in the lives of our citizens who are the beneficiaries of a people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN. Sociocultural community building focus on ongoing initiatives to narrow the development gap among member states and to widen and deepen connectivity in the region. The ASEAN sociocultural community is deluged by challenges brought on by COVID-19. This pillar is focused on community building that engages and benefits our peoples and aims to make ASEAN more inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and dynamic. This pillar also focuses on health, education, labor, disaster management, vulnerable populations, information, culture and identity, and many more. Our health sector is instrumental in an ASEAN response to the COVID-19 pandemic that is timely and appropriate. The ASEAN Emergency Operations Center Network for Public Health Emergencies provide a platform among ASEAN member states officials working at their respective crisis centers on disease prevention and control to share information in a timely manner. The ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund is a pool of funds that would allow ASEAN member states to receive financial assistance for an enhanced response to COVID-19. ASEAN is nearing the operationalization of the ASEAN Regional Reserve of medical supplies and equipment for public health emergencies, the ASEAN Standard Operating Procedures for Public Health Emergencies, and an ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Plan, all designed to bolster the regional health system of ASEAN nations. With COVID-19, ASEAN connectivity takes on a deeper meaning, highlighting the importance of a more resilient and well-connected ASEAN. With COVID-19, countries opt to restrict movement to contain its spread. Businesses closed, people lost income, and restricted access to education. The pandemic disrupted the global supply chain, affecting the flow of essential goods such as medicines and protective equipment and food. ASEAN's connectivity is important in mitigating the impact of COVID-19. We have the opportunity to rebuild a better ASEAN through investment in critical infrastructure to facilitate movement of goods, services, and labor, and scale up supply chain efficiency, develop a labor force with skills that match the demands of the new normal, and empower MSMEs to adopt technology to maintain growth. ASEAN is an important regional grouping, and other countries reach out with to form partnerships. ASEAN has 10 dialogue partners: Australia, Canada, China, the European Union, India, Japan, the Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Russia, and the United States. ASEAN has a development partnership with Germany and Chile on capacity building and development cooperation. We have sectoral dialogue partnerships with Pakistan, Norway, Switzerland, and with Turkey being the latest, in which concrete cooperation is pursued in more specific issue areas. ASEAN conducts regular meetings with these partners through the ASEAN +3 meetings, the East Asia Summit, and of course, ASEAN +1 meetings to discuss a broad range of issues of mutual concern. The ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund has received wide support from many partners, which would allow ASEAN member states to draw from a pooled source of funds to carry out efforts to contain the spread of the virus. These efforts would not be at this level of sophistication if not for the 53 years of existing cooperation among ASEAN member states and its partners. Despite the unparalleled challenge posed by COVID-19, we move to exemplify this year's theme of a cohesive and responsible.
Marian Jocelyn R. Tirol Ignacio from the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, if you have questions about that first presentation, you may type in your questions in the Q&A chat box, which you can find at the bottom of the interface of this webinar. And also, for our netizens, you may post your questions in our live stream, or you may reserve your question for later's Q&A session after all the presentations of our speaker. Now, before I introduce you to our next resource speaker, allow us to treat you first to a cultural intermission. The National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCAA, and the Cultural Center of the Philippines, or CCP, have teamed up with the focal agencies on culture from the ASEAN member states, or ASM, to present a project dubbed as Break the Chain, the Arts Respond to COVID-19, an Awareness Campaign. It is a compilation of video performances of traditional, folk, classical dances from the ASEAN member states, which were especially choreographed to promote the practice of health and safety protocols like hand washing, wearing a face mask, and social distancing. The omnibus video will be launched next week during the second session of this webinar series. And to give us a preview of this, may I invite your attention to a video performance from our friends from Brunei Darussalam, entitled Tari Norma Baru. This campaign video promotes proper hand washing and no shaking of hands to avoid the spread of COVID-19. Everybody, let's watch this. Thank you very much, and CCA, CCP, and to our friends from Brunei Darussalam. Now we will now move to a series of presentations from our resource speakers from the Department of Education to share with us the plans and programs of the education sector to ensure that learning continues for our students, even with the limitations of or on face-to-face classes amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first speaker from the Department of Education, or DepEd, representing Undersecretary Elaine Pasqua from DepEd's Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Service, please welcome Director Ronila Ko. Okay, we will just wait for Director Ronila Ko for her presentation. Meanwhile, we'd just like to acknowledge all our participants or attendees inside this webinar. Our theme for our first webinar is responding to educational disruption and ensuring learning continuity amid COVID-19. We are joined inside this webinar by different representatives from the academe. We have teachers, students, we also have parents, and also local information officers from various parts of the Philippines. And also we are live streaming now on Facebook in different social media platforms. And if you have questions about our presentations, please do post your questions in our live streaming. And also for our attendees inside this webinar, you may type in your questions in our chat box by using the Q&A icon. You can find it in the bottom or at the bottom of the interface of this webinar. And for our netizens and even our attendees, if you will be having online posts regarding our first webinar for Sama-Sama ASEAN Webinar Series, please don't forget to use our official hashtag Sama-Sama ASEAN. And also, just to promote, this is just first of the 4 webinar series. We have upcoming webinar sessions as well, and I hope you do mark your calendars for that. We have August 13 with the theme Building Cultural Solidarity and Voices of Resilience Amid the Pandemic. That's on August 13. On August 20, we'll be having Navigating Economic Uncertainties Amidst COVID-19. And on August 27, Government Response and Strategies in Managing the COVID-19 Crisis. All right, I hope our next resource speaker is ready. Can I cue now from the Department of Education to give the first presentation from the DepEd side? Can we have already Director Ronila Ko? All right, so before we give you our next resource speaker from the Department of Education, we will have another video presentation. If we witnessed a while ago that presentation from Brunei Darussalam, this time we have this presentation from our friends from Cambodia. Let's all watch this. Thank you very much to our friends from Cambodia. Now, before we give you Director Ronila Ko, we will proceed first to another speaker. This time, we have Director Lito Palomar. Director Lito is representing Undersecretary de Estado San Antonio, and we have the OIC Director 3 of the Bureau of Learning Delivery of
May I request for the presentation to be flashed on screen? Okay, if I may just start now with the presentation. So basically, my part of the summer series is to present to you the efforts of the curriculum instruction strand of the Department of Education. I'd like to zero in the principles of curriculum instruction in the light of the learning continuity plan. So basically, I would like to focus on the discussion of the curriculum, specifically the process of identifying the most essential learning competencies. Basically, all the most essential learning competencies were taken from the K to 12 curriculum guide. We have screened all the learning essential competencies and labeled them as the most essential learning competencies. The essential learning competencies are defined as the competencies that a learner needs for continuation to subsequent grades and ultimately for a successful life. How did we select the most essential learning competencies? So basically, we have to consider. Okay, I think that the screen is ready for sharing. Okay. So again, I'm representing Undersecretary Diosdado San Antonio of the Curriculum Instruction Strand. So for my talk outline this morning, we have the LCP principles, the most essential learning competencies, the multiple learning delivery modalities, the learning resources, assessment, and health standards, and others. Next slide, please. For the principles of basic education learning continuity plan, we have aligned all the efforts of the curriculum and instruction division or strand in the following principles. One is to protect the health and safety and well-being of our learners, our teachers, and personnel, and prevent the further transmission of COVID-19, thus, or hence, the development of different modalities. We also have to ensure learning continuity through the K-12 curriculum adjustments, because then and again, the Department of Education believes that education must continue. We have to facilitate the safe return of our teaching and non-teaching personnel and learners to work, and we have to be sensitive to equity considerations, remembering those learners who have no access to internet. We have to cater to their needs also, and so we have prepared several modalities for that. And then we link and bridge the basic education learning continuity plan to depth its pivot to quality and to the future of education, because we have to assure that despite the pandemic, there will be quality education in the process. Next slide, please. Focusing on the most essential learning competencies, again, these are all taken from the K-12 curriculum guide a learner needs for continuation to subsequent grades and ultimately for a successful life. For a competency to be said as to be considered essential, it must be aligned with the national standards or frameworks, such as, for example, holistic Filipino learners with 21st century skills. We have also considered the factor that they have to connect the content to higher concepts across content areas. They must be applicable to real life situations. They are important for students to acquire, even if a student leaves school at a particular grade level, because several learners will be homeschooled this school year, and they cannot be expected to be ordinarily learned by students if not taught in schools. Next slide, please. And 171, or a reduction by 60%. So we're expecting that we have about 40% of the original learning competencies to be learned this school year. That is ensuring that the curriculum is lean. This also addresses the curriculum review, finding the congestion and overlaps. Next slide, please. Looking at the most essential learning competencies per learning area, earlier remains with learners long after the test or unit of study is completed, and it is useful beyond a single test or unit of study. So basically, we have retained MELCs on the criterion of endurance, meaning that most of these competencies are lifelong skills. Examples are research skills, reading comprehension, writing, map reading, and hypothesis testing. Next slide, please. So basically, this is an example of the most essential learning competencies in English. From the original learning competencies, we have noting details in literary text, listen to, note details in a selection, listen to, note details by asking or answering questions about a story or a poem, listen to, and note significant details in a literary text. So basically, they're all about noting details. So we have just retained or rephrased the most essential competencies as note significant details of various text types. Next slide, please. This is another example for science grade 3. So in the process of selecting the most essential learning competencies, some were actually subsumed, some were actually merged. So this is an example of a merged competency. Describe sources of light and sound, heat, and electricity. Enumerate uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. And because they only mean one and the same, they have been merged and stated as describe the different uses of light, sound, heat. We're using endurance as a criterion. So example is describe the changes in the weather over a period of time. So we have retained that competency and labeled that as most essential learning competency, because this learning competency is very important as it is both observable and enduring. The learning competency is also found in the further lessons on weather and climate. So basically, this is a prerequisite learning competency also for succeeding lessons. Next slide, please. For mathematics, we have grade 1, quarter 1, visualizes and represents numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials and counts the number of objects in a given set by ones and tens. So stating those two in one MELC, we have visualizes and represents numbers from 0 to 100 using a variety of materials. Our reason is that we have just clustered them as counting the numbers of objects subsumed or is part of visualizing and representing numbers. Next slide, please. Showing you another example in Araling Panlipunan or social studies. We have nauunawaan ang konsepto ng komunidad or community, nasasabi ang payak na kahulugan ng komunidad, at nasasabi ang mga halimbawa ng komunidad. So basically, we're just trying to explain all these concepts about community and therefore they are merged. For a competency in Araling Panlipunan that was dropped in the process, na ipapakita sa iba't ibang sining ang pagmamalaki ng natatanging kaugalian, paniniwala at tradisyon ng iba't ibang lalawigan na kinabibilangan sa rehiyon. This was dropped because this is very specific. Another is nakagagawa ng wastong pagkilos sa pagtugon sa mga alituntunin ng pamilya, AP1 quarter 2. This is retained, of course, because this is an enduring learning competency and expressed as same. Nakagagawa ng wastong pagkilos sa pagtugon sa mga alituntunin sa pamilya. This is comprehensive and this is enduring and therefore this is retained. Next slide, please. Considering the curriculum in the light face plus television and radio-based instruction, and face-to-face plus ODL or MDL and TV RVI. So basically, we have three learning delivery modalities, and homeschooling is actually an example of an alternative learning delivery modality which is facilitated by parents at home, so purely by parents at home. And we have a separate policy on homeschooling, which is to be released soon. Next slide, please. We have also allowed our regions, divisions, and schools to contextualize learning strategies and learning delivery models deemed appropriate in their context and consistent with the COVID-19 guidelines and regulations. sharing with them strategies, also possible requirements for the learning delivery modalities and strategies on how to go about this. But basically, this is being administered by the Office of Alain, USEC Alain Pasco. Next, for possible requirements for modular distance learning. Next. We also have possible requirements for ETV and radio-based instructions, such as the following, for both public and private schools. Next slide, please. As you can see, we are identifying the terms of reference of each stakeholder involved and as well as their area readiness. Next slide, please. So as I have mentioned earlier, homeschooling is an alternative delivery mode, not a delivery modality that is home-based. This is, we have to differentiate home-based from homeschooling, and homeschooling is different. Next slide, please. For the learning resources, we have the following. For the grade level, we have kindergarten, and we have identified the list of materials to be given to them. This is K to grade 3 storybooks through competition writing, kindergarten activity sheets, and ADM K learning kit. For grades 1 to 3, we have primary lessons for grades 1 or for grade 1, storybooks through competition writing, grade 1 English, BE, administration and school should be by batch on different schedules. About 10 to policy on classroom assessment, which shall be issued soon. Next slide. So we have also drafted the key elements of DepEd health standards, increasing physical mental resilience, reduce transmission, reduce contact, reduce duration of infection of others. And in the development of program, or it is anchored on because students' voice and choice is important to us. We provide feedback along the way, encourage students self-assessment, reflection, and goal setting, and this shall form part of the framework for classroom assessment. We have defined the role of the parent, the role of the student, the role of other household partners, as well as the teachers, and our instructional leaders. So we resist traditional grading. That is why, again, we are coming up with an interim policy, considering all the suggestions and considering the situation. This might be issued anytime soon. Request for an honor code pledge from students and learners, and we really have to to have their commitment to continue studying despite the pandemic. Part of this presentation that our technical assistance framework in the learning continuity plan of the Department of Education, and we are looking also into its inclusion in the learning continuity plan of the region, the SDOs, and the schools. And empowering. And he coined the term Prince for this.
Development and field operations of the Department of Education. He also serves as the chair of the ASEAN Senior Officials Meeting on Education. Please welcome Undersecretary Jess Mateo. Yusek Mateo, you have now the floor.
Good morning, Diane. Good morning to all, especially the teachers who are watching here. Can I request the Secretariat to put up the slide? Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide? Who's controlling the slide, please? Yeah, the new slide, please. Anyway, while they're fixing the technical glitch, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Undersecretary Jess Mateo. Gusto ko lang pong parating sa inyo what with your Department of Education is doing. And mind you, the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan is an effort, a joint effort of all governance levels of the Department of Education, from the schools to the central office. These learning opportunities shall be available. As I've said, no, it's called the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan, so that we can ensure that education will continue. As mentioned by our colleague a while ago, the principles of the Learning Continuity Plan consists of 5 elements. The first one, and first and foremost, various learning modalities that will be used. It also includes a discussion on the teachers, school leaders, parents, and community participation in the implementation of those learning deliveries. Naturally, because of this situation right last July 27 in the State of the Nation address of the President. He said, and let me quote, "We must implement online learning, modular learning, and TV and radio-based broadcasts which students coming from different backgrounds can avail. Your department will provide the printed modules for those who cannot afford online learning. Because we realized after we conducted a survey that not all areas in the Philippines have connectivity. Components like learning resources, mobilization, health standards, and regional contextualization. Kindly take note that in the learning continuity plan, we ensured that we look at the different contexts, the different conditions in various fields. And therefore, in the implementation of the learning continuity plan, we made sure that it is contextualized to the local conditions. Such that each region were able to prepare in consultation with various stakeholders, including local government units, their own contextualized learning continuity plan. And the fact is, this learning continuity plan prepared by the regional offices were presented to their regional development council and were approved. Beyond 693,000, and that represents already 81% of the previous school year. But mind you, and let me take note, that we are trying our best to invite all the learners to continue learning. But at the end of the day, as the secretary mentioned, it's really the decision of the parents and the caregivers whether they will allow their children to go to school or not, or to continue learning. But we are attempting to ensure that they are provided learning opportunities. Next slide. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the curriculum, we managed to reduce the learning competencies to the most essential learning competencies. Alam nyo, hindi lang to sinimulan natin nung time na pumasok si Secretary Briones, and in relation to RA 10533, which is the K-12 program, the department really is tasked to schools in the remote areas, they may adopt and they will adopt a mix of different modalities. So in the case of Nabotas, what they did is use the printed modules delivered at homes at the crib and on a Friday. They have to check on the progress of the learners. On the other hand, in IP communities in remote areas, these printed modules can be complemented by television or radio-based instruction. In fact, no less than Secretary Briones, we're able to have a meeting with the Secretary Andanar so that we can use the existing government TV and radio station. We're also in discussion with other private providers of these different platforms. Next slide. Alam nyo, yung paggagawa natin ng mga polisiya ng ating mga plano ay hindi lamang yan hinuhugot kung saan. Sa katunayan nga, gumawa tayo ng tinatawag natin na Learner Enrollment Survey. This was completed after the end of the enrollment. We started this in June when we had the enrollment exercise again. No? Take note that in this slide, we asked the question, who among the household member can provide instructional support to the child's distance learning? And you will said that they will able to do that, or alternatively or in combination, yung mga elder siblings or grandparents. So which means for those who don't have that household support, DepEd will now find through the local government a way to assist our learners so that they will continue. Next slide. We also requested as part of the conversation and decision which modality to take, the question that was asked was what devices are available at home that the learner can use for learning. So lumalabas dito, merong mga kababayan tayo na merong laptop, merong radio, merong TV, merong kung ano-ano. Dito kasi lalabas kung paano yung pamamaraan natin ng paghatid ng mga lessons. Next slide. The other is what distance learning modalities do you prefer for your child? So if you look at this slide, majority are saying that it can be online, 1.3 million for TV, radio 937. But the majority is a they're the ones who educated their children right at their home. And now they're sharing this technology under the dynamic the NAIA teachers training. We have organized a lot of training programs for our teachers as well as for household and community partners. In fact, our department DRRMS, no, Disaster Risk Reduction Management Service, continue to provide webinars for teachers and learners as well. This coming August 24, when we open, we will ensure that part of the activity would be the orientation again of our learners, our parents. Next slide. Some of the learning continuity plan, next slide, learning continuity plan courses for the school and division leaders are captured in this slide. No? So you have a 3 courses, the learning delivery modalities. The second one is on the welfare. That's the third is on personal well-being or wellness. Next slide. Ganon din po sa mga teachers natin for our teachers and various modules. Kindly take note that all of this training program is consistent with our budget through recalibration of existing budget. We also managed to look at the balance of our school MOE. As far as the local government is concerned, the team right now is helping the department through their Abutin Natin campaign, wherein we encourage individuals to contribute at least 10 pesos a day for 10 days for 10 million Filipinos or whoever would like to contribute to raise an amount to finance our printing of materials for the purchase of computers and other devices. Next slide. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, one of the basic principles of the learning continuity plan is to ensure the and health of our learners and our teachers, and as well as I mentioned, DepEd reiterates the complementary stringent conditions the conduct of limited face-to-face. So what are those conditions? First, next slide, it will only be allowed in low risks. It will only be allowed in January 2020. There has to be greater coordination with the local government units, particularly the regional interagency task force. Next. I will not go into the other slides itself because this is again embedded in the department order. Finally, I'd like to point out in relation to the regional contextualization that a number of dry runs and simulations have been made. Next slide. In this slide, you will note the link, no? If you want to look at the simulation or dry runs that our regions have made thus far, no? You can access it to these links, no? Madami po tayo, all regions and almost all divisions have conducted their respective dry run and simulation. Ang purpose po ng dry run and simulation na to ay para po masiguro natin na kung ano man yung modality na napili ayon doon sa konteksto na i-implement ito, ay pwede pa nating gawan ng adjustment. Gusto ko rin pong susugan na itong mga simulation, dry runs na ginagawa natin, mga effort na ginagawa ng ating kagawaran ay hindi mangyayari launching of our LCP to the presentation of all the efforts that made thus far, but by our schools, our divisions, our regions, our local partners, all of us. Sabi ko nga kanina sa isang meeting, isipin lang natin ang walis tingting. Ang walis tingting ay matibay dahil sama-sama kumpul-kumpol. Pero kung tanggalin mo yung isang strand na yan, ay napaka-weak. Tayo po, ang strength natin is we are one. We act as one. We will heal as one. Salamat po. Back to you, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Jess Mateo from the Department of Education. Please do stay inside the webinar you suggest because some of our participants will have questions for you, which we will entertain during the Q&A session. Thank you very much. Yusek Mateo from DepEd. All right, moving on to our next and last speaker representing Department of Education.
We have actually in responding to COVID-19, but let me put things in context at the moment, okay? Even before COVID-19, we actually have an office at the Department of Education known as the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Service. This office has been created. Okay. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, next slide, yes. Okay, This office has been created in 2011. Okay, we have 3 areas of work. That's disaster risk reduction and management, climate change adaptation, and also education and emergencies relating to armed conflict. We have as a structure, the central office, that's the office that we have, the DRMS, but down the line, regions, divisions, schools, we actually also have DRRM coordinators, okay? And we have DRRM teams at all levels. Next slide, please. So this is our reporting. These are the legal basis of which we report our accomplishment at the national level as well as at the international levels. Okay, and all this should converge actually with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. In terms of mandate, so we ensure safety, of course, and institutionalize the RRM, climate change adaptation, and education emergencies. Eventually, we hope to actually move towards the building of resilience. To the integration in the curriculum, including teacher training and psychosocial support trainings. These 3 should actually be integrated within the 4 thematic areas of RA 10121, the NDRM Act of the Philippines in 2010, along the lines of rehabilitation and recovery, response, preparedness, and prevention and mitigation. Next slide, please. Okay, we have actually our mission, our vision, and that's safety and resiliency. The outcomes should be reduced risks and impacts, and we have 3 intermediate outcomes. The protection from death, injury, and harm of learners and personnel, learning continuity, and that's what this is all about, and of course, the protection of education investments. Next slide. This 6-year strategic goal is to actually, within this administration, institutionalize the work across all levels of the department and establish a package of coordinated interventions. Next slide. Key result areas, we actually have 6, okay? And that is every policy and plan should actually be risk informed. We have strengthened partnerships for resilience. We have our own DRM information systems and research, resilience education, which is basically capacity building, IEC and advocacy for resilience, learning continuity and resilience interventions. This is where response, rehabilitation, and recovery comes in, and then monitoring and evaluation of calamities, emergencies. We have a quick response team. And this is also composed of the different offices at the central office. Next slide, please. And with partners, we have 2 mechanisms. In times of peace, we have the Education Resilience Working Group, so that we have actually a number of NGOs, UN agencies, as well as private sector who are actually part of the group. And in times of emergencies or disasters, we have the National Education Cluster partners as well. So this speaks of three principles: the protection of learners and personnel, the facilitation of safe return to schools and work, and ensuring availability of learning materials, various modalities, including delivery, assessment, teacher training, and parent involvement. Along these three principles, there have been policies, plans, operations, coordination mechanisms, and capacity building that have been ongoing. The engagement of partners, including the education cluster and the education forum partners, IEC, and of course, mobilizing the fund support. Next slide, please. We have at the DepEd right now what we call the DepEd QRRT Task Force COVID-19. This is replicated down the line, okay? So this is a merging of the one I presented to you a while ago, the quick response and recovery team, okay, that we have, plus several other offices that became part of the task force actually. This task force is led by the School Health Division and co-led by our office. This is replicated down the line. Of course, policies and plans, we have actually a number already of policies and plans that have been released since March. Frequent press conferences of our EXECOM. We have generated letters from our students all over the country, the so-called letters of hope and gratitude for our frontliners, which have been distributed actually by our partners and our coordinators. Next slide, please. Budget-related support, we have realigned budget. Various offices have done that. We have also provided the guidelines. Our finance have also advanced salaries of employees at various levels. The National Provident Fund have also provided the moratorium, the guidelines of the moratorium provident loan funds, and have increased allocation of funds for loans for our employees. Next slide, please. The protection of learners, as I said, we have a monitoring, reporting, and coordination system actually for cases and for schools uses quarantine. We have capacity building, we have mental health and psychosocial support, we have child protection lectures, webinars, and we have also provided PPEs, medical supplies, and supplements to our skeleton workforces and others who are actually part of the response. Next slide. This one, I will not go into details of this because it has been exhausted by our previous speakers, but suffice to say that the learning continuity with respect to curriculum has been ongoing. The preparations have been ongoing, including exploring actually the use of TV, radio, and other modalities. Thank you. Yes. So these are the other modalities. We also have the DepEd Commons. I guess you already know that. We have millions already of those who have access this platform. Next slide, please. The safe return to schools. We have, of course, guidelines in accordance with the DOH guidelines. I've mentioned public service continuity, the Brigada Escuela. We have actually launched this together with the Oplan Balik Escuela, the disinfection of schools, the facilities, and of course, infrastructure and capacity building and school-based feeding by our school health division. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've mentioned this already. We have hotlines for our cases, helplines, okay, from central office down the line. Next slide, please. Okay, video conferencing, okay. I think this has been discussed, okay. And we've also trained our personnel on the basics of COVID done by DOH. We've done several of this as also part of our mental health psychosocial support services. Next slide, please. I think we can go next slide. At the moment, as of July 2020, we have trained actually more than 403,000 school personnel. That includes teaching personnel, secondary teachers, on how to deliver psychosocial support services, as well as understanding COVID and other webinars. We're ongoing. This is our third day for also building the capacity of elementary teachers so that they can provide, come opening of classes, they can actually provide colleagues, and this is 28 sessions already.